Hey, welcome to the Art Condition Podcast, a weekly show that will discuss the business, community, and often undiscussed stress and mental health concerns of being a professional artist or even a serious hobbyist. I'm Joby. I've been in the tattoo and illustration professions for 25 years. My co-host is Moose, a data analyst, social media manager, and art agent. If you enjoy the content, please consider visiting the Patreon page in the show notes to help support the effort. Or if that's not an option, please like, subscribe, leave a good review, or just share with your friends. And definitely go visit the links of our guests on this episode. Thanks for listening and have a great day. Let's just assume that it was a success. So I'm going to turn off the starting soon. Let's make this an official thing. Boom.
All right.
For real. Like I said, we've got Spectra.
For real.
That's all we need. How are you, Sal?
I'm doing good. How about you guys?
You look fantastic.
Thanks.
Is there of course, people listening to a recording won't be able to enjoy the majesty and the grandeur. What is the costume?
Just me.
Would you say this is your inner self? This is your
Basically,
most...
yeah. Every time I do makeup looks, I just bring out what I like in myself.
Is it different every time, or is there a theme that you usually go with?
There's usually skulls involved.
Yeah.
There's usually skulls and devils involved. But there's always a change. Sometimes if I have new makeup to play with, I'll mess with that and do some themes around that. So if I have something that's really iridescent or holographic, I'll do some looks around that, or create makeups within makeup. So for example, I might do a skull, but when in certain lighting conditions, you might see a pumpkin face, that kind of thing.
Have you considered just having a dark cloak sitting in the empty chair?
Actually, there's one hanging right off my chair.
So it's like you are your own best monster. I
am. Aren't we all, though?
Yeah, absolutely. But today we're talking about you. Don't try and change the subject. Who are you, Sal? Tell us a little bit.
Who am I? What do you want to know?
Well, tell us a little bit
where I'm going.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your background. Like where are you from and how'd you get into art and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Chicago. I've been living in Minneapolis now since 2003. But I still go back to Chicago because that's where my parents are. Beyond that, as far as where I started, I was that kid that liked the Godzilla movies and the King Kong movies growing up, and all the monster movies, and I think all of that just stayed in there. However, I had some pretty a lot of people who watch my streams. If any of you guys are watching, one of the things you often hear me talk about is that existential popcorn moment that I had when I was about 4 or 5 years old. And ever since then, I became obsessed with what is consciousness, what is mind, what is it to be, essentially. Pretty big shit for a 4 or 5-year-old kid to be thinking about.
Yeah, we're gonna need to know more about that, but in a second.
Yeah, I can tell you that story. Yeah, no problem. Ever since then, I got obsessed with that. And, in sci-fi and in horror, those are very reoccurring themes as well.
Mm-hmm.
The name, the DarkCloak, that kind of organically became a thing when I was a teenager because I always wore trench coats and shit like that. And eventually people were like, oh, here comes the cloak, shit like that. People would say the shadow, those kind of jokes. And so I started putting my artwork online, and I didn't want to just use my real name, right? Because this is in the days where you didn't just put your real name out on the internet because of all that stuff. And
Right.
I was asking my friend, I was like, man, I want to put my artwork online. There's Epilogue is where I started. I don't know if you've ever heard of epilogue.net.
No.
Stephanie Law, Jeremy McHugh, a lot of those guys started on Epilogue. That's where I first started posting my artwork, and I didn't know what to do. And it's like, well, why don't you just put the nickname in there? It was like sometimes it's just like, oh, here comes that dark cloak or the dark cloak. And I was like, all right, cool, I'll put the dark cloak. And it just stuck. And I've been working it ever since. It's been about 20 years I've been working that name. But as far as I'm concerned, that is my name.
Okay.
So that's kind of where organically it started. But a lot of the themes that have been running throughout my life, like the themes of what is underneath, what is beyond, what is below the surface of people, even, which is where a lot of my interest in psychology and philosophy and even politics, I guess, come into play. Motivations, hidden motivations, those motivations that you have that you don't even realize you have. For example, an easy one that most people can grasp is the motivation of self-sabotage out of fear. That's a hidden motivation that people carry around, and then they get the results that they get, which we're all familiar with what that could be like. Yeah, that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of like where that whole moniker and like the persona, well, it is really me. It's not just a persona, but that's where all of that kind of flows through. And in my artwork, there's often the theme of monsters fighting monsters. And a lot of that resonates very deeply with me as well as a person, because growing up, I often felt like a monster for various reasons. Reasons that I've only started understanding even in the last few years as an adult, as I'm understanding racism and understanding social dynamics and things like that. Like, oh shit, like that feeling of being an outsider, that feeling of being something that doesn't belong or something that isn't wanted. Um, Feeling those things, wrapped into my psyche and my personality, but also, much like anybody who's a monster kid usually is rooting for the monsters, and there's always like a little bit of tragedy involved with the monsters, like Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, even more recent monsters, Godzilla, of course. Um, and yeah, so I think all of that expression has just kind of culminated. So everything that I've been picking up along the way, including artists that influence me, makeup people, movies, games, and so on, have basically funneled down to who I am today. And then the last 5, 6 years, I've very intentionally and very specifically harnessed the education of retracing those roots. Um, what was Sal into when he was 4? What was Sal into when he was 12? What was Sal into when he was 20? And why? And it turns out a lot of the artists and a lot of the material that I was very obsessed with as a kid, that ultimately creeps into my work, was a lot of it was done by the same people.
Oh yeah.
Paul Bonner was a big one. So Paul Bonner is actually when I saw Paul Bonner's work, especially his work on Mutant Chronicles, which is like the very cyberpunk sci-fi, barbarism kind of property. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. They were in competition with Warhammer. When I saw Paul Bonner's stuff, it was very cyberpunk, and it was very very colorful, almost cartoonish, but it still had that like gritty realism to it, and that latched onto me big time. I had already seen like Boris's work, Frazetta's work by then. And those guys, like I loved looking at their work, but it was kind of like this over there thing.
How old were
When I
you at
looked
this
at
time?
Paul's stuff, 12,
Oh, okay.
I was playing Mutant Chronicles and really like looking at the artwork and just obsessing with it. But when I saw Paul Bonner's work specifically for that property, it looked like what I saw in my head.
Oh yeah.
And something happened, something clicked, and I went, wait a minute, people get paid to do this stuff. And
Nice.
that's when I started pursuing painting. Because before that, I was like interested in comics, maybe animation. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just know that I was drawing all the time, making stuff all the time. I was that kid running around the neighborhood, making movies and shit like that. That was me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and learning about makeup people like Jack Pierce or animation people like Ray Harryhausen, all of those dudes. Um, and that's when I really started getting serious about painting, more so than any other artist. I think Paul Bonner is the one that like made it click. So fast forward to now, a lot of the art that I was looking at back then, I mentioned Godzilla, I mentioned a lot of like these other movies and things and games as well. Turns out another big one that I didn't know I was influenced by my whole childhood was an artist by the name of Noriyoshi Orai, and I'll put his name in the chat here.
Yeah, please do, and then we'll include it in the show notes as well when we
Awesome.
put that up.
Yeah, Noriyoshi Orai. I think we've talked about Noriyoshi's work previously, Joby, but for those of you guys who don't know, he did do some work for Metal Gear, and Noriyoshi's work is very textural and it's very colorful. And anyone who looks at my work, you'll probably see those influences in there. I do love using texture. I love rendering material, and I do like having a lot of like saturated colors in there. I try to stay away from like lots of black, weirdly, in my work. Ever since I started doing that, I feel like it's brought out more depth in my work as well. Um, yeah, artists like that. And then the other element that I started retracing my roots on is the real Ghostbusters cartoon. I started I started rewatching some of the cartoons, the old real Ghostbusters cartoon from the 80s, and I realized just how much the background paintings from that show were in my head. Same thing with
Huh.
Scooby Doo. There's an artist called Walter Paraguay. I love Walter Paraguay's work, specifically on Scooby Doo. Um, and again, I just started pursuing that. And then I started pursuing more of the other artists that kind of influenced them. And also tangentially, I just started doing more homework as to who was involved in what. So, for example, you remember those old He-Man toys, the Masters of the Universe toys? In fact, you
Oh,
could see
fuck
it
yeah.
on my camera there. There's
Yeah,
that
yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah.
It's the collection of all the paintings from the He-Man illustrated, the box art. It was all
Uh-huh.
fully painted stuff. So I've been retracing those roots, getting familiar with who worked on those and kind of
Mm.
following their careers and what that looked like. A lot of those
Mhm.
guys worked in animation, funnily enough. But yeah, that very distinct, heavy metal 80s style. I love it. It's basically saturated in my bones, and but not just 80s. A lot of my stuff is very much influenced by like retrofuturism, uh, like atomic age sci-fi, all of that stuff. Everything pretty much from like the 30s up to the late 80s, maybe early 90s is where I draw a lot of inspiration from. What happened is about 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing the hustle. I was doing the freelance hustle. You're on the hamster wheel. A lot of times when you're doing the freelance hustle, you're working for yourself, but you're not really working for yourself. You're working for
Yeah.
whoever's paying you at the time, right?
Mhm. Yeah, we talk about that a lot.
Yeah, and what I realized about that hustle and also the whole thing about, like, improving your portfolio, having a website, doing the social media thing, which is a whole other conversation we can get into later. I was looking at that. It's like, well, how is this gonna be sustainable for the long term, right? Because you get work, the work comes in, you do the work, the money comes in. The money is essentially already gone because you have bills to pay, you gotta keep the lights on.
Mhm.
And then the work is gone, and most of the time that work isn't anything yours. It's paid for, it's gone. Maybe you'll have gallery rights and that sort of thing. Maybe you'll be able to use it for T-shirts and things like that, depending on what the client agreement is. And then that's it. That's it. And then you're still on the hamster wheel.
Mhm.
So I was thinking about that, and I was like, all right, this isn't sustainable for the long term. I want to start investing in myself. I want to treat my time, my money, even the work that I produce, because I also do music and everything else, as some of you guys know. I'm like, this all has to be for something to take care of like future self. So a lot of what I'm doing now is to take care of future self, so that I'm not eating cat food when I'm 65. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, like, how is the difference in income from when you were doing the treadmill to you working for both now and for the future? How is that in your
Well,
immediate?
it's a roller coaster either which way, but to be honest, it's very similar. It's very similar. So here's what happened. So when I was having that inquiry with myself, I sat down. I was like, okay, we're gonna need to have a come to Jesus talk with myself and like figure this shit out because this isn't gonna work. Um, and the first question that popped into my head is, who are you trying to impress? Right? You're doing this portfolio, you're doing all this stuff, you're getting these different client gigs, all of that stuff. Who are you trying to impress? Who's it all for?
Mhm.
Right? Like thinking about 65-year-old Sal's one thing. That's more of a logistic situation, right? Money, savings, etc. But like, who am I trying to impress? Like, who am I serving with all of this? Who have I busted my ass for 17 years learning all this shit for? Right? Plus, because I've been drawing since I was like 3. Um, and I really like had a really honest talk with myself about that. And I said, you know what? Screw all that, because I'm not trying to impress any specific game company. Not trying to impress any specific film company. And I was like, if I'm trying to impress anybody, it's going to be 12-year-old me,
Mm.
the me who
Mhm.
made that decision to invest all this time and honestly money and everything, headache, et cetera, risk. Right? There's a lot of risk involved in doing this. Um, And I was like, okay, so what does that look like serving 12-year-old me? And so that's when all of that stuff started culminating, like retracing my steps, retracing my education, not just like scholastic education, but my artistic education, even as an artistic, as a media consumer, playing games and movies and everything else. Um, and that's when I made that decision. So here was my plan. I was going to take 6 months off to just work on my own stuff because I have properties that I've been writing and building since I was like 15. I have this thing called the Zetaverse. Some of you folks have heard me talk about the Zetaverse before. The Zetaverse takes place, as I like to say, sometime after the future happened, which started in 2005. That's the joke, right? It's like that kind of VHS, very retro, like something you'd see at the video store kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to take 6 months off just to focus on that, to at least build something for myself, right? And then I can maybe try to do something with that. And I revamped everything. I revamped my website. I revamped my Twitch stuff. I revamped my branding, essentially more or less to what you see now. Um, I didn't last 6 months. I lasted 2 weeks.
Oh.
Because what happened is my stuff started making an impact in a way that I hadn't seen before. I started getting more client calls, emails. I was starting to get more inquiries. My work took off way more than it did when I was trying to do like the hustle thing.
This is
And so I didn't get to
yeah. I don't want
I
to
didn't get
interrupt
to
you. I
focus
was
on
just
my
going to
stuff.
say, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get to focus on my stuff, but thankfully, like, to kind of answer your question, Moose, um, it's been a building momentum ever since then, kind of leading up to where I am now, where it still looks very similar to what it looked like before income-wise. Like I said, it's still a roller coaster. There's still the ups and downs, just like anything else. What is it? The feast and famine cycles,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. Except the difference is that I am building a lot of my own stuff now, as opposed to not doing that. And then, here's the thing too. I've met so many artists who, they have their career, they make it big, they work in the film studios, the game studios, and so on and so forth. And then they reach like 55, 60 years old, if they even last that long in the industries. And then they're fucking done. They don't want to do it anymore. They want to paint even for themselves. They're just like, yeah, I'm sick of painting. I'm sick of doing this shit. They get burned out, or they get, chewed up and spat out by whatever experiences they had along the way. And that's really stuck with me as well. It's like, this is going to sound really cheesy, but one of the taglines from a movie poster that always stuck with me was this one. It's all men die, yet few live. And I was like, holy shit, that is so fucking true. Because so many of
Is
us
that
just
Braveheart?
go through the motions. That is fucking Braveheart. That's right. Can I swear on this, by the way?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Please
Okay.
do. We encourage it.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, it is Braveheart. And I saw that poster and I was like, whoa, when did Braveheart come out? 94?
Something like
93?
that, yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, 14. Oh, just lost Moose.
That'll happen sometimes. He'll be back. Don't worry.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I saw that one with that poster and it stayed with me. And I was like, that is so true. Like, what is it actually? And, given everything else I said about my obsession with like being and all that stuff, consciousness, mind growing up, it's like, that is so true. Like, everyone dies, but one day this all ends. So what do you do in the meantime? And so many people go through their lives just waiting,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
essentially,
yeah,
for
for
that
sure.
time. And then when their time is starting to run out, they have, midlife crisis or whatever else, because they feel it.
There's a couple.
So yeah, that stuff was really formative for me.
There's a couple of things in all of what you said that I feel like would be worthwhile to linger on just a little while longer, because there was one thing that I felt pretty deeply that like really hits hard for me, that I can't say that it's really been crystallized in the way that you said it, because I've heard it stated similarly. Watching a lot of One Fantastic Week, you would hear those guys talk a lot about like, what were you into when you were a kid? Those are the things that like really inform you the most, whether you're paying attention to them or not, or how much you do indulge those resources and reference points. They're hitting you in some, they're knocking on the door one way or the other.
Right.
But the way that you put it, that I think puts a particular bite to it, but not in a bad way, is
Okay.
impress 12-year-old me.
Hmm.
Like not even as much as like, well, let's analyze what were we into when we were 12 years old, but actually make the active effort to be somebody that kid would think was really fucking cool. That
Yeah, the way I
really
actually said it was do something that'll make 12-year-old me shit his pants is really the what happened. That's the way I put it. But if it became impressing 12-year-old me, like the
yeah,
shorthand version.
right. No, that
Yeah.
I feel like a deep emotional resonance with that, because that happened. Just speaking personally, that happens to be a big
Mm,
part of like where I'm at now, is coming kind
mhm,
of, it seems maybe like going through a lot of the process that you have recently gone through of analyzing a lot of those kinds of things, but then also mixing them into a lot of like where I'm at now with like being a father and raising a
mm.
child myself now, and like this weird harmony that's happening between old childhood inside, like the kid inside me, and then the kid that I see growing up from me. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you said too, that we get a lot of, I hear repeated, I know Moose has too, that when you start doing your own personal work, you actually find that people start taking, that's when uh, artists that have gone through that process have often found that's where they really start getting the most interest and start
Mhm.
finding more of the type of work that they want to do with like clients, and like getting hired and contract work and stuff, is when they are really spending the time putting out like all of their like most like personal work, or whatever. And it seems counterintuitive that like, well, if I do the stuff that like is just for me, that's somehow going to equate to
Right.
a paycheck. And people are like, it certainly, even for me, like having heard this over and over and seeing it play out over and over, it's still hard for me to like have that faith of like, you gotta figure that out, you gotta take the time to do it, and people will like, that will start showing people what you're really capable of, and they will want you for that.
I think it resonates on the themes of authentic self-expression, which is probably one of the hardest things to achieve in life. Also, knowing yourself is one of the hardest things to achieve in life.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's where it comes from. It comes from this innate honesty that starts showing through in the work. And when that starts coming through, I think it's the flow is more natural, I would say. When I pay attention to other people, when they're hitting that zone, um, there's something special there. And I think that's the lightning in a bottle, right? One of my good friends says, Christian Hernandez, I'm not sure if you know him. One of his little sayings is, art is a lot like a fart. If you force it, you're going to shit yourself.
I mean, that's pretty good. So do you think
Yeah.
that you said that you went through this process of really like mining your own data, so to speak, and
Hmm.
finding out what it is that is underneath all of those layers that's knocking on the door, like I said before. And you got really invested in personal work, developing this world building project, but then
Hmm.
that didn't care, it did, the momentum of it altered a little bit when you then started getting a lot of like interest from clients and stuff. Now,
Right.
but then you also are maintaining some forward momentum on all of these side projects. And by the way, we're going to get into like a bit of what a lot of those projects are.
Sure.
Um, but do you feel like you're still on do you feel like you've been roped back into the treadmill, or do you think that the quote unquote treadmill is like less debilitating because you still have these outlets and these avenues where you're still in touch with like the true source?
I would say that it's still a treadmill, right? No matter what. I mean, life is going to be a treadmill of some form or another because we're getting older constantly. That can't be stopped. Life is going to keep on lifing. I think the difference is that it becomes a treadmill of your design. You get
Hmm.
to say who you are on that treadmill as well.
Hmm.
And also, the treadmill ultimately has a purpose. For me, it's about building for the long game. For future self. Like I was saying earlier, that's like the logistic, um, hopeful outcome is taking care of that guy with as much as I can right now. And And to answer the other part of it, you mentioned about, the burden of the treadmill. Yeah, I would say it does alleviate it quite a bit because you're doing stuff you love. And
Hmm.
when you're having fun, time flies. Um, and I think, kind of going back to what you mentioned earlier, Moose, and what I was talking about, like it building to where it is now, one of the things that's really awesome for me is that it's starting to self-propagate. So a lot of the work that I'm getting is work that essentially I would be doing anyway, right? Like that Star Wars piece I was working on not too long ago for Monsters of Merca. They had me doing an homage to the Hildebrandt brothers, that Star Wars poster from New Hope,
Hmm.
as a D&D mashup, and they're also some of my favorite artists. So me getting to basically like fully immerse into that poster, yet problem solve everything I needed to problem solve for their property, was a blast. And in a lot of ways, it's the kind of thing I'd be doing anyway. Because I've done like some of those Frank Frazetta mashups where I had Finn and Jake doing the Death Dealer, the Death Dealer painting pose, um, that sort of thing. So it does get easier, and also I'm attracting more people that are essentially in the same boat as I am. So I guess it's like one of those like attracts like, even like you guys. People who are having the same types of conversations, the same type of journey. Also, this whole pandemic has turned everything on its head, and with all the challenges that it's brought, it's also brought a lot of opportunities and potentials and possibilities for people like us and smaller companies. And I think one of the things that really made me pay attention when this whole thing started, and this is yet another shift that I'm making with my work and my art and my life career, I guess, um, is that right now we have what most advertisers wish they had, and that is a captive audience. Because so many people are staying indoors, so many people are staying at home, so many people are consuming media at a rate that we've never really seen before. Now,
Hmm.
um, and when I started, kind of thinking about this, I thought it's another opportunity for me to take things for myself to the next level with the mentorship stuff, for example, that I do. Because there's so many people who've lost their jobs, who suddenly now have the time to work on art, or who are just stuck at home all the time, so they have time to work on art or write their stories and build their own properties, or who are sitting there facing their shit. A lot of people are having to face their personal demons right now, and for a lot of people, it's tough. A lot of my mentorship, crosses over into that stuff as well. But for me, where I'm kind of shifting into is the idea of not just being like a freelance artist or like limited to that bucket, but more of the idea of like being an entertainer. So that means being able to funnel in even more of my music, even more of my content, the artwork, of course, the property that I'm building, storyteller. What pretty much at the heart of everything that I do. This is another thing that I figured out really early on in life. At the heart of everything that I do, it's all storytelling. The makeup is a story. Doesn't matter if you're sculpting something, doesn't matter if you're creating a concept, doesn't matter if you're creating a technical diagram for an industrial machine. There is a story being told in that process. And that's essentially what I've kind of boiled everything down to, that it's all stories and experiences that we're creating, regardless of the medium, and regardless of the vehicle that we're telling those stories and creating those experiences in. That's
Hmm.
where I operate. One of the things that, kind of retracing back to, teenage me, younger me, um, a book that had a tremendous experience on impact on me. It was a random find at a dollar store, like a dollar a day at a strip mall. It was the Making of Terminator 2 book. In fact, it's back there. I could probably pull it out if you guys wanted me to. But the Making of Terminator 2, and it covered everything about the movie. It covered storyboards. And it was remarkably thin considering, how meaty Terminator 2 is, but it covered everything. It covered prosthetics, makeup, the fact that they were building miniatures for a lot of the chase stuff, or like the nuclear holocaust scene. A lot of that was all miniatures, all the puppetry involved, all the design work, the concept art, matte painting, like all of these disciplines, and never mind the CG and everything else too. um, that came together to craft that film. And it's one of the best films ever made, right? Terminator 2, like anyone who sees is like, holy shit, there's a lot going on in this film. Um, and that again, like, look, oh, so that's when I was able to put a name on the guy who created the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park and the Terminator and the Predator and like all of these creatures that had been favorites of mine that I obsessed over learning how to draw and like memorizing and all that stuff. Stan Winston and his studio and all the people that work for him. And now fast forward to now, I know so much more about the way that system works, who the people were that actually worked on those things, and that whole dynamic that goes into play there. But yeah, all of that was an education. All that again further just kept reiterating that it's all stories and experiences, and that all of these disciplines can be used. You don't just have to be one thing, which is the other part of who I am and what I do is I don't consider myself just one thing. I consider myself a multidisciplinary artist. Um, because for me ultimately that's at the heart of it is storytelling and creating experiences.
That's something that I wanted to dig into a bit with you, is this idea of, a jack of all trades. You refer to yourself as a polymath and
Right.
multidisciplinary. And this is another thing that is close to my heart because it's something
Hmm.
that causes me some distress. This idea that I have things pulling me in many different directions, not to the degree maybe that you do, where like, I don't really dabble in music per se, or
Sure.
performance or any. It's strictly more like visual, but the projects within that sphere, I feel like there's this and there's that thing, and they don't necessarily have the same story running between them, and it's agonizing for me to try and decide what is the thing that I should be focusing on. What's most telling my story. They always like talk about like,
Hmm.
tell your story, and people like will like respond to your story or whatever, and
If you
I'm
build
like,
it, they will come.
well, but yeah, but then I'm like, well, what is that? Because there's all these fucking things that I want. Like, you see it on my Patreon where I'm like, well, I'm doing
Hmm.
this and I'm doing this and I'm actually thinking of like redoing my Patreon, just specifically the introduction part, to be like, I'm doing everything. I'm doing like so help support me and help me do all of it, because it's like I can't tell you that this is the thing that I'm doing because next week it's going to be something different. That's not to say that one thing gets abandoned, but
Right.
I can't just be this thing. And what I'm hearing from you is that like that's like encouraging me in this regard is that like that like the jack of all trades, the polymath, the multidisciplinary
Hmm.
outlets, that can be the story. Like that can be just like who you are. Just own it and embrace it and promote that as your, dare I say, branding. That's just that's the thing.
As
Here's
long as
my
you can find
advice
people that
there.
want it.
What'd
Yeah,
you say,
well, here's
Moose?
the thing. My advice there to answer both of what you guys both said. Um, find your anchor. Figure out what the anchor is. Why all of those things attract you, and what is it that you want to do in all of those things, and what's the common line between all of them? There's got to be a common thread between all of them. It might just be you. Maybe you're the common thread, but it could be a theme. You know, for me, it's very much. I would say psychological horror, I think, is probably the common thread between all of it. But the anchor at the heart of it for me is storytelling and experiences. I like doing that.
Man, that makes see, it's just good advice. I'm not arguing with you. It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
I'm speaking strictly for myself.
sure.
That's like, it's when I hear pieces of advice like that where I feel some pain, because then it's like, and I don't want this whole thing to become like an emotional support group for me. But I hope that maybe it can help some other people too, just by me
Hmm.
talking some of this out.
Yeah.
When you say like find the anchor or whatever. So then I think about like one project I have where, it's a series of paintings that I want to do that are an investigation into, fatherhood, childhood,
Mm.
like a lot of that kind of resonance points that we were talking about like before. And then like I have this other idea for reinterpreting Star Trek as if it were medieval spacefaring vehicles, so
Cool.
like where And then and I'm like, yes, this is good advice. Find the anchor. But
This is
what's
me
the
putting on my
anchor?
consultation hat and going, why not both?
No,
You could
yeah,
tell
no.
the story of a father and son in that setting.
Oh shit, you just fucked me up, dude. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to take
We'll have to
your
have a
me-
jam. We can have a
yeah.
jam session sometime.
I feel like I should. I owe you like purchasing one of your mentorship tiers in Patreon as well. So, but we're gonna talk more about that as well.
Mhm.
But you stream on Twitch, and every time I go to your Twitch stream, it seems like you're working on something different. Again, all these like
Yeah.
varied disciplines that you're in. One of the more there's many interesting things about your stream, but it's one of the
Thank you.
exciting things about going there. It's like, what's what's the
Doing this
DarkCloak
time.
up to today, right? You also
Right.
always have like lots of people, like whether you're co-streaming or you have them in your Discord, just being on voice chat. There's always interesting conversation. It can also get like really silly and lightheaded. It's
Oh yeah.
it's a really great place to be. So like just a shout out to that. Everybody should go check
Thank you
that
so
out.
much.
So how do you keep from, this is another thing that I struggle with, others too. How do you keep from going crazy, from keeping it all balanced? You have all of these things going, finding the time, you know what I mean? Time management and making sure that you give over enough time to make sure everything is sort of like progressing at a reasonable
That is the
momentum.
tricky question, isn't it?
Yes, I've stumped you finally.
So that is the tricky question. So this is still like a work in progress that I'm learning, but one, hey Ian, Ian knows this. I've been working on practicing learning how to ask for help. That includes on my creative projects, as well as learning how to delegate. That
Mm,
includes also my creative projects. So that's starting to ramp up and that's starting to build up. But for my own self management and around that, um, what I'm realizing is small size bites, right? Or bite size milestones. So like the initial thing, what can you do in half an hour? What can you do in 1 hour? What can you do? You know what I mean? Can you set a day aside just for the one thing that you wanna move forward? But small steps. Break everything down into the smallest steps, and it kind of ties into one of the other, I guess, philosophies that I've been carrying for a while now, for a few years, ever since I first heard it, is the be 1% better every day philosophy.
mm,
Um, and it's a very abstract thing. It's pretty absurd when you really think about it. There is no way to quantify being 1% better, than tomorrow, right? But as an idea, as like a baseline, or as like something to fall back onto, 1% better can mean anything. It can mean today, to be 1% better, you're gonna organize your closet. You're going to organize your art files. You're gonna organize your brushes. You're going to, you know what I mean? Like anything that helps do the housekeeping in your headspace, because obviously our headspace affects our creative space. If it means clean up your studio space, and if that's what it means to be 1% better, then that's what you do. It's how they say professionals show up.
hmm Yeah.
It's not just about being there. It's about actually showing up. It means
hmm
bringing it, right?
Yeah.
Like when I've worked in theater, when I worked in film, when you show up, you're being physically there is not enough. You got to be there, present, to be able to adapt and maneuver around what's needed from you, to answer people's questions, to handle breakdowns when they happen, because they will fucking happen.
hmm
It's the same way. It's find all those little 1% ways that you can help yourself show up and be in that zone. So, for example, there's going to be times you're going to sit down to do art because you have deadlines and you're not going to want to. That's been happening to me a lot this year with this everything that's going on, this pandemic and everything, this undercurrent of the world's on fire. And you guys have all seen that meme. Anybody want to buy some art? That whole thing.
Right. Yeah.
Um, that undercurrent's there, but it's like just whatever little bits you can do to help yourself. That might be the 1%. But anyway, all that aside, pedantry aside, if we subscribe to the idea that you can be 1% better every day, right?
Mhm.
In 300 days, you're 3 times better than when you started. as a surreal abstract idea. Now, let's say you fall off the wagon a couple of days here and there, and maybe over the course of 300 days, maybe you've kind of slacked off a total of like 30 days here and there, right? Like cumulatively, you're still 270 days better or percent better than you were when you started. Like if you look at it that way as an abstract thing. So when you slip up and you have a day of just like slacking off and just whatever, sitting on the couch and playing video games, most people fall into the habit of beating themselves up or feeling guilty while they're doing those things. Sitting there playing a game and feeling guilty about it, sitting there watching a movie and feeling guilty about it. And then you don't end up enjoying what the fuck you're doing. So why even bother doing it at all? Right? It's like you're on a diet and you're eating something you shouldn't be. You don't even enjoy what you're eating.
Hmm.
Right? You feel like shit afterwards. You're sitting there like you're getting away with murder while eating a fucking slice of pizza. It's like, no, man, like manage that shit. Have a cheat day. Do whatever you need to do. Just don't let the long term get, thrown off course for the one slip up that you had. And it's the same thing with the 1% mentality. If you have an off day here and there, it doesn't matter. It's just 1% that you didn't gain. There's still more
Right.
percentages to gain.
What you
And
just
it's,
said,
it's about the long game. Yeah.
what you just said reminds me of a friend of ours, Art of Blake, where
Oh,
he can't
Blake.
he can't even do personal work because he feels guilty when he has client work that he needs to do, and he has like 4 months of client work worked up, lined up, but he still can't work on his original IP because he
Yeah.
feels like it's disrespectful or a poor use of his time.
Right.
I suffer from the exact same thing. So Sal, what's your advice to people like in Blake and my position? And
Take my
maybe
mentorship course.
okay, maybe that'll be part of
That's
it.
the easy answer. Well, that's the short answer. Honestly, like the quick answer to that is build a better relationship with yourself. For me, things like imposter syndrome, guilt, comparison, all of these things have fallen to the wayside a long time ago. Um, when I realized the way that I was behaving towards myself, towards my work, towards my art, and how I was doing were the things that I would not tolerate from anybody else, like very simply.
So, but
Um,
go ahead.
yeah. No, no, go ahead. What are you gonna ask?
Well, I was gonna ask for like I love the head game stuff. I'm definitely not trying to say like hand wave that away.
Right.
But do you have thoughts on practical implementation? As far as like scheduling or what's an actual um, a task, a physical task, like the head game definitely being part of this. What are
Hmm.
things that people can do that they can start doing like tomorrow to either whether it's time management or like you said delegation or whatever, like what are some practical behaviors that people can start doing immediately that will kind of
Scheduling for sure,
yeah.
definitely. Um, but the thing with answering a question like that is that there isn't a one size fits all solution to these issues because
Right.
everyone's different. Everyone responds to things differently. Some people don't respond very well to structure. There's some things about myself that I don't respond well to, like having a scheduled structure for. And with the experience that I've had with myself, essentially, I've learned how to outsmart myself, to know what things I should schedule rigidly and what things I should just kind of leave lax, and that works for
Hmm.
me. Um, but if I were to tell somebody else to do the same thing, it could fail spectacularly. My good friend Jessica Fong turned me onto this talk. I think it was a GDC talk. It was about game development, but it was pretty universally adequate. It was talking about how all advice is bad advice because there's always so many variables out there at play. Not never
Hmm.
mind like the internal variables of like what a person's head game is like or imposter syndrome or all of these things, but also the external factors, right? Like I don't know, pandemics and riots and all of these other things. Um, you know, uh, there's always going to be something new to adapt to, or even just other logistic issues like health issues. I have friends who, they want to be professional artists and everything else, but they have chronic health issues that basically debilitate them quite a bit, and they really only have maybe 1 or 2 hours a day to do art.
Mm.
And so comparing myself to them is shitty. It's just not fair, because I need to recognize that they are where they're at. So it's more about each individual having the awareness to be adaptable to do what is required for their specific set of variables, right? So, like, they talk about the hand that you've been dealt. Everyone's been dealt a very different hand. Saying, hey, check out that ace, or hey, check out that five, you don't need it, isn't going to help everybody at the table. But yes, schedule management is good. Managing your head game is good. Like I said earlier, setting up, small attainable goals, maybe that you can achieve one goal a week. That's even a small one, like a character sketch or something like that.
Mhm.
Start there. And as you build that momentum and you build that familiarity with your own self and your own systems, you can then manage yourself more effectively.
You said a couple of things that make me think of common themes that we could maybe find amongst people, where you're saying like all advice is bad advice, and each individual situation is going to be too unique to give specific advice.
Right.
But a couple of things that you mentioned make me think of some baseline common denominators. You mentioned something about tricking yourself,
Hmm.
and so I can't remember exactly how you put it, but something to the effect of, kind of
Outsmarting
like
yourself.
outsmarting yourself, and kind of like identifying, like where the sticky points are. And
Hmm.
so in that, like I think of something that I heard a long time ago in reference to something that wasn't particularly art related. Uh, Permaculture is a word that people could look up and look into. There's a lot of valuable insights in there, and one of them was like the problem is the solution.
Mm.
And so, just using Blake as an example, I hope he doesn't mind.
Hi, Blake.
He has some guilt about setting us like deprioritizing client work for the sake of personal work. So I wonder if there is like a head game in there that Blake could play with himself. Or I could use myself as an example in this situation too, where you make yourself your own client. Like you treat yourself
Right. Oh,
as,
yeah.
yeah, as like
Hmm.
that you owe yourself time as well, and so then
Hmm.
you schedule time for this particular thing, and you like try your damned hardest to treat that in the same way that you would any other client work. Like if I don't do
Yep.
that, there's a client that I'm letting down. They're never going to hire me. They're going to stop coming back, and I'm going to miss out on all of these other opportunities that could have stemmed from it. Like if you're going
And
to
that
give
goes back
yourself,
to,
yeah, if you're going to give yourself a guilt trip, give yourself a guilt trip about letting down your inside client.
yeah. Yeah.
Make the
No, it goes back to the whole thing
counterproductivity work
about,
for you.
when I say about always be this is something people on my streams have probably heard me say before, but it's like always be a professional, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the whole thing about showing up. Show up for you too, right? Because if you don't advocate for your own stuff, your own characters, your own stories, your own dreams, all of this shit, who the fuck will?
Right.
Right? And if
Yeah.
you're not advocating for your own stuff, right, putting your own stories out there, your own messages, or even just like the things that inspire you, be the change you want to see in the world, that whole thing. If you're not doing that for yourself, even if somebody else comes along and says, hey, Joby, hey, Blake, hey, I believe in your stuff. Hey, Sal, I believe in your shit. You should be doing your stuff and draw your characters, and I want to see more. If you're not fucking doing that for yourself, it's going to be a headache. You're going to struggle. It's going to be even more work, because
Mm-hmm.
guilt and all of that stuff. I mean, that's work. That's an expensive energy. Are you invoicing somebody for your guilt? Probably not. you know, I wish I could invoice people for that stuff, but yeah, if you're not invoicing somebody for it, don't fucking do it.
Oh,
Um,
wow. I sorry to interrupt you, but
Speak of the devil.
yeah, Blake just showed up in chat. It's like we summoned him. Fucking awesome.
Hey, Blake, we've been talking about you, buddy.
In the best way possible. But sorry, I didn't mean to derail you.
No derail at all. Yeah, but it's that. It's you have to learn how to advocate for yourself, and you have to learn how to be a professional for yourself, and always being a professional, always showing up, always sticking up for your work, always sticking up for yourself, just like you're saying, like you're your own client, and that's hard. That's really hard.
Mhm.
As far as how to go about that, it looks different for other people. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about the mentorship stuff, and I know you want to talk a little bit more about that too, anyway. So this might be a good segue for that. So just to kind of give you an example, for the first few sessions of my mentorship, I have some like pre-made modules that I've basically created and written out for people that establish like the foundational elements and pillars, I guess, of what goes forward from there. And everyone's different. What I've realized is that everyone's different. So, for example, r- some people really crave like freedom and spontaneity and like not being locked down by anything in order to be productive. And some people are completely opposite. Some people, what they've been like, they've had too much of that chaos. What they want is a more militaristic, like structure, order, like everything's very boom, 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 boom. And that's what works for them to be productive. But it's like, figuring out the programming, figuring out the script that's running the show, what's driving the bus for each person as well, because that's different as well. Kind of like what we talked about earlier about hidden motivations, right? Or
Mhm.
covert contracts, I think they're sometimes called. Where for example, someone's covert contract or hidden motivation might be fear of success. It's really easy to say you're afraid of failing, but fear of success is far more insidious.
Mhm.
Things like that. So throughout the course of what I do, through conversation and through a lot of what I do is working through metaphor and story, and um, the way I talk about it when I'm sitting with people in my sessions with my clients is, when we're in a session, I'm no longer here. Sal is gone. All that's here is just his guide. You got your abyss, and we're going to dive in and we're going to see what we find. And my job is to figure out where the bad smells are coming from, because the philosophy that I kind of built this from was the idea that um, the longer you stand knee deep in bullshit, the more you will get used to the smell.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it's worse. Not only do you get used to the smell, eventually you defend your pile of bullshit. Eventually you're like, well, my pile of bullshit's the best bullshit. You don't know me, blah, blah, blah. You don't know what I've been through, right? And that pile of bullshit's warm and it's comfortable and it's known, right? It's known, it's a known quantity. Stepping out of that pile of bullshit and walking somewhere else is scary, because people ultimately fear the unknown. Again, there's that whole DarkCloak thing about what's underneath, what's beyond, what's in the abyss, what's in the void. That's where a lot of these themes that I'm about come from. Is it's what's behind that, what is behind yourself, or what you think
Mhm.
is yourself. Is that really you, or is that a third grade teacher that told you one day that your art sucks? That sort of thing.
Yeah. And
You know,
it's hard to disentangle those things too. So I think that's a a lost train of thought. Keep it, something to keep in mind, just as like a way to start seeing your way into it, is like there could be one little thread that leads to another, but it shouldn't be taken on as this process necessarily of like you're going to wake up tomorrow and okay, now I've identified all of the things that are, as you say, in my pile of bullshit.
right?
You gotta kind of take it slow. I want to. I think that we will come back to more of the philosophical end of
Yeah,
things,
sure.
and your mentorship and how you approach that.
Just one really
Oh yeah,
quick
yeah. Go
addendum
ahead. Go
there
ahead.
about what you just said. Like the final little nugget on top of that is on top of that
The cherry
is the
on top.
idea that everything is the cherry on top of the pile of bullshit.
Yeah.
Is the idea that everything is practice. We often
Right.
think about
Yeah.
practice towards positive things. We
Hmm.
practice riding a bike. We practice art. We practice driving a car. we don't really think about how we practice shitty things. Like we
Mm-hmm.
practice being angry, we practice sitting around being upset, we practice feeling sorry for ourselves, we practice comparing our artwork to other people's. We practice feeling guilty about doing the things that we want to do instead of doing the other thing that we should be doing. All of that stuff. It's practice. Everything is practice. So once you start realizing that everything is practice and a habit building, and removing like the judgment from it, just realizing it like as like a programmatic uh, logistic, right? You're like writing a script in like code. You're writing code out, and the more that code runs in your system, the more efficiently it's going to run. Well, if
Mm-hmm.
you've had a lot of practice feeling guilty about shit, that's going to be a really well practiced script, and it's going to be in your page file, always accessible no matter what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's how I look at it. For me, like kind of just really quick self disclose here. Um, the thing that I realized, uh, quite a few years ago was that I was an expert black belt level master, high tier 10 level criticizer and complainer. I complained a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Give me any fucking thing and put it in front of me. I will find a way to nitpick it to death and complain about it and tell you why it's shit. And when I realized that about myself, I'm like looking at it as kind of like a D&D game. I'm like, man, I've invested a lot of experience points in this tier. Is that something that I really want? And I can't respec it, right? I can't make a
Uh-huh.
new character. Like you're saying, I can't get up tomorrow, and now that I know that, I can just stop doing that. It's not going to happen. So how do I flip it? Well, maybe I can just deviate those points into a different branch called constructive criticism and critical thinking, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about outsmarting yourself, but also kind of gaming your own system that you've programmed for yourself.
I
Yeah.
And
had a
that's
similar situation where I would always find problems with things, but I found it was a whole lot more useful to, after you find a problem, you find the solution to that problem.
Mm.
yeah,
Right. Yeah, yeah, totally. It's be proactive about it. Um I love the tech tree analogy, of like where you put your skill points, like
yeah,
in Warcraft and a whole bunch of other games, have tech trees of like you get your little skill point when you reach a certain level, and it's like where are you going to put it? And based on what we've been practicing, our skill points will start getting put without even necessarily being consciously aware of it. We're putting a lot, like you just said, we're putting a lot of skill points in some of the more self-defeating ends of our of our tech tree. One thing that I've come to start thinking about it as is friends,
mm,
or people that maybe not friends, people that and all of these like internal voices and internal habits and practices are people that so there's sides of yourself that are friendly to you, that are like healthy for you to hang out with. They're encouraging, they're
mm,
supportive and nurturing and all that kind of stuff. And then there's sides of yourself that are real counterproductive, real toxic, real like not good people to be hanging out with.
right.
But maybe you have something, just like there might be people in your life that are counterproductive, but it's like hard to disentangle yourself from them or whatever. Those things that are inside you can be very much the same way, even worse, even like more seductive and powerful because they're inside you. They are you. And you've spent so much time getting used to and hanging out with these people that say shitty, terrible things about you to your
Yeah.
face, abusive things to your face. And you're just like,
And you
well,
believe them
you
because they
believe
sound
them,
like you and they
right?
wear your face.
But it is possible, and I don't think this is theoretical. I don't want to make like too hard and firm a statement, but I
Mhm.
think that it's possible, just as simply as like once a day have a little chat with the friendly side of yourself, and just role play it. Hey, like be as weird about it as you want to be, like speaking out loud to yourself, like, hey, how's it going? Okay, good to see you. And then immediately, like the shitty part of yourself is going to come in and be like, what are you doing? You're talking to yourself? Who are you fucking talking to, you asshole? Like, what's wrong with you? and, and then you're like, okay, well, at least I said hi to them. And then maybe they'll stay
Mhm.
a little bit longer the next day.
This is the Saturday Night Live thing, right? The because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
Well, and that's kind of the thing that I think proves my suspicion is that
Hmm.
like we immediately want to start mocking that. Like when we
Yeah.
think about that, when we think about making friends or like be like trying to hang out with the more friendly side of ourselves, that's like what we think of, like all of the cliches and skits that we've seen that have kind of mocked that. It's almost like a cultural thing that we have where it's like, don't take that seriously. That's
Hmm.
that's silliness. You're what's his
Yeah.
name? Yeah.
And a lot of that is just, and you've heard me talk about this before, but a lot of it's internalization as well as projection of a very judgmental society that crab mentality is a topic that I often bring up in streams when these types of things come up.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with crab mentality? Crabs in a bucket, that phenomena? For anyone listening or watching, crabs in a bucket or crab mindedness comes from the phenomena when you have a bunch of crabs in a bucket that as they're climbing out, the other ones that are also trying to climb out pull them
Oh,
down in their own effort to climb out. And
right.
then what happens is none of them get out.
Mm-hmm.
Other ways that it can be played out or phrases that are associated with is like, if I can't have it, you can't have it either. You know,
Mm-hmm.
ways that people may have maybe experienced it in their own lifetime is like in the old neighborhood, for example. If you're like, oh, I'm going to go to college, and someone goes, what? So you think you're smarter than me? That's
Yeah.
crab mentality in action right there. You
Right.
know, so kind of going to what you're saying, like that knee jerk feeling of like, wow, this is so stupid. I'm being nice to myself, or I'm saying hello to myself, or waving at myself in the mirror, like how fucking shitty is that, or whatever. It's those voices. You're funneling that judgment onto yourself that would normally you'd think would be coming from the outside world. You know.
Yeah. Or the
Um,
or the I think about the ladder experiment with the monkeys and the bananas, and they hang these. Do you know that one? They hang the bananas from the ceiling, and they put a ladder like right underneath it. And of course, the
okay.
monkeys go up and get the bananas. But then they teach, I don't know, like some small handful of monkeys in the troop to like, that's not okay. Like if you go up the ladder, you get punished somehow.
Oh,
So then all those monkeys teach the other ones, don't go up the fucking ladder. Like it's a bad news up there. Don't. Someone in the chat said, "Do not believe his lies" from the movie Memento. But it's like that. Like all these
mm,
monkeys are like, fucking no, don't do it. So and then they gradually like cycle one monkey out for another until the original troop is totally gone, and it's new monkeys that have never learned like the original programming, but they're all still following this methodology of like,
right,
don't
right. Or the
fucking go up the
experiment
ladder.
with the buzzer where everybody stands up and then they sit down when it goes up again, or the bell.
Oh, that one I don't
It's
know.
like a reception. Oh, it's like a reception area. It's like a dental office or something. It's like a reception area, and they'll have a couple of actors just sitting there, and then someone will be there for their appointment, and like they're all waiting, and then the bell goes off. So two people are plants, and the rest of the people that show up aren't plants. And a bell goes off. Whenever the bell goes off, people stop what they're doing and they stand up. And the new
Mm-hmm.
person sees it's happening, and I guess they feel self-conscious, so they stand up as well. And then the
Oh,
bell
right,
goes off
right.
again, and then everyone sits down. So then what happens is as the group is growing, as new people who are part of the experiment show up to join for their appointment, that isn't really
Mm-hmm.
going to happen. Like that is the appointment, them being there for this fucking experiment. Every
Mm-hmm.
time the bell goes off, essentially what eventually starts happening is even the new people look at the or what the I guess the old new people start looking at the new people, looking at them like, hey, you got to stand up, and somebody will go, well, why? And they'll go, I don't know, but everybody keeps standing up, and so
Right.
that'll happen. That'll keep happening, and it'll keep happening, and next thing you know, you have 10 people standing up and sitting down whenever a bell goes off, and then like the experiment closes, and then they explain to them what just happened. But seeing that play out and the way people like the dynamics that play out as a result of that is really fascinating because you kind of see people getting mad when someone refuses to stand up.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
Like, well, why isn't that guy standing up? Everybody else is standing up. And then it just starts shifting the dynamic in the room really quickly. And it's just really funny how something as innocuous as a bell chiming and people standing up or sitting down can just change the dynamic of a room. It's
There's a
bizarre.
real life version of that at football games with the not the national anthem, but they play "Proud to Be American" before every football game, and some people stand up and other people won't, and you'll see some of the people that
Uh-huh.
are standing up looking at the people Like, there's no like actual contract that say you have to stand up during the recording, but some
Right.
people get offended by it if you don't.
Social pressure
Right.
is insane, man. And it
It's
occurs to me like
ridiculous.
it occurs to me, as I'm thinking of you were telling these stories about, studies and things that we've heard or read about or whatever, and I'm thinking of more like as you're talking other examples
Mm.
of ones that I've heard about, and there's so many of them, and it's occurring to me that it seems like there should be more, like a greater effect, like for as many of these kinds of studies that have been done, like shouldn't there be a greater effect on society at large, for what we've learned. I understand that, well, the human condition is powerful enough to work against it, but man, like we keep getting example after example after example, and like the more that it almost seems like the more we understand about how people interact with each other, the less we uh, uh, put into action the lessons that we learn from these things. Like, why do you think that is?
The reason I'm smiling is because there's this fantastic documentary that covers exactly what you're talking about. It's called A Century of Self. And what
Write
that
this down.
documentary talks about, it talks about when Freud's nephew, I can't remember the guy's name. I think Ian knows what his name is because we talked about it before too. Freud's nephew basically brought a lot of Freud's, hi Ian, brought a lot of Freud's theory into the world of advertising in the 20s and 30s. Um, and basically, it's all about psychological emotional manipulation. And we are trapped in these systems. And another thing that I would recommend people look up is sick systems. I'll write this in the chat as well. Sick systems are fucked up. A lot of times, sick systems are associated with like employers and like personal relationships. Edward Bernays, yeah, yep, yep. And but anyway, so the world of advertising used to be where it's like, you know, this is a quality product. It is, handmade. It's made with durable materials. It'll last you 25 years, blah, 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 blah. It's all about like the craftsmanship and the durability and all of that stuff. That's what advertising used to be. Yeah, they had like the catchy slogans. And yeah, there was a lot of like snake oil and all that stuff, but it was all about the way that things were sold to you, even if it wasn't true, was all about the craftsmanship
Mm-hmm.
and about the value that you're getting for your buck. And it went to every savvy consumer knows that if you know about electronics, you're going to have this gizmo in your collection. You're going to have this on your backpack. And anyone who
Right.
doesn't have this backpack, will be judged badly. And it became about the social dynamic. You know
Right.
what I mean? It became about looking good. It became about playing into that part of people's emotional psychology. And so fast forward to now, watch the documentary. It's packed. I mean, it's like a 4-hour documentary. It's like I can't even paraphrase all of it, but a lot of it is talking about that. Is
Mm-hmm.
how advertising and everything went from being about logistics to being about feelings, and then ultimately how then trickled down into everything else, into propaganda, into the way news bulletins are crafted, the language that we use in these things, the war effort, how that got influenced by all of this stuff, uh,
They saw the success in the
propaganda.
model and they're like, use this everywhere.
Absolutely. If you guys look at like the Nixon era and the protests around Nixon era in Vietnam and everything, how what when somebody uses the word hippie, right?
Mhm.
What comes to mind? Usually
Asshole.
it's like the dirty, unwashed
Yeah.
hippie and like, the hemp sweater and like dreadlocks and what the fuck else ever, right?
White dreadlocks.
The white dreadlocks, all of that shit. And that's all just like a cartoon essentially that was created by the Nixon administration and the people who were for the war. The dirty, unwashed hippie trope came
Mm-hmm.
from that. Because what you had is you had a lot of like university professors, you had a lot of suburban people, like upper class people, all of these people who were actually the ones protesting about it. But by popularizing the image of the dirty, unwashed hippies, and those were the people who were protesting about the war and the love and the free love and the drugs and all of that stuff, it delegitimized the conversation that they were having
Mm-hmm.
because saying we shouldn't send our people to Vietnam became unpatriotic. it became something you don't do. To do that means that you're against America. So when you think about these types of things and these types of behavior models and how they play even today in this, very enlightened year of 2020 that we live in, you really start realizing some shit about how easily manipulatable we are. Going back to your analogy, the study about the ladder and the monkeys and the banana, we are still stuck in that model. And
Right.
it's models within models within models within models, man. It's models all the way down.
Yeah. There's also an effect. What is it? Epigenetics? Is that the one where like the mouse that runs the maze will have offspring that will run it a little bit faster?
Oh, yeah, like the concepts of genetic memory and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure that there's a bit of that at play too, where it doesn't even this is something that I think about a lot too, where it doesn't necessarily have to be like the boogeyman, that's like orchestrating like all of this, puppet mastery or whatever. It's just like this snowball effect where what his Edward Bernays, as Beth mentioned in the chat, was Freud's son, or wait, no, nephew, who like kind of made the connection between advertising. Everybody saw the success in that. Let's reuse that format for all of these other purposes. Boom, now you have a slightly bigger snowball that's rolling down the hill, and it just keeps picking up bodies as it rolls down and rolls down and rolls down until now here we are, where the greater sociological effect is like, not only is it political propaganda, but we've now internalized a lot of these kinds of things, and a lot of this, and especially when you tie in another thing that we talk a lot about is, the stigma of the artist, and how that's not even a respectable way to make a living. Why would you do that to yourself? And you're you're breaking your mother's heart. So you put that together, with this, weird nebulous propaganda that you can't even like point to its singular origin, and now you have the tortured artist. And,
Yeah. When it's worse than that, it's not just one snowball, it's multiple.
Right. That's that's
and
true.
you might have a leg in one and an arm in the other, and you're just trapped in them, and you don't know that you're trapped in them.
God,
It's
this
pretty fucked.
this analogy has so many layers to it. I want to press pause on it though, because I want to because I feel like we could investigate the psychological and the abstract for hours, and I think that we'll have you back on. Aeon in the chat is another person that really loves to go down these rabbit holes. I think it would be fun to have
I know.
you and them on at the same time.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, and just really fucking pull the ripcord. But I want to maybe close out with some of your projects, because we've alluded to like all of the different things that you have going on, and how many plates you keep spinning. There's a couple that I would like you to tell us a little bit more.
Sure.
You recently kickstarted a project called Anvil Art Forge. Am I going to pronounce that right? Yeah. And I always read it, and I love the look of the word, but it's one of those things where you don't say out loud, and then when you do, you're like, that's
no, you got it.
That's not a ding on your choice. That's a ding on my inability to properly enunciate. So Anvil Art Forge, tell us about what that is. It's a really cool project.
It's a tabletop role-playing game where you play deep space occult researchers who go into the outskirts of known space, and basically they investigate like paranormal findings, eldritch ruins, things like that. They're basically on the search for dark knowledge, to summarize it quickly. But it's a game that you can play with any poker deck. It's made for 2 to 4 players. It's very narrative driven, and I'm trying to find how many variables there are. So as you're playing, one person becomes the conduit of the void. And what that means is that the person becomes a monster. They basically end up becoming a Cronenberg, Lovecraftian, freaky monster thing. And the other players then have to take out that player. Let me get the link for you guys. So you guys can, I'll drop the link in the chat.
And the links for these things will also
it's
be in the show notes too.
Cool, perfect. Um, but yeah, that was funded in February, and we are currently playtest. The pandemic really slowed down our playtesting, unfortunately, as well as having to scramble and readjust. That really screwed everyone's schedules up, and people have been having to move. The California fires have been screwing up with everything as well. But it's all moving along. It's still happening. All the monsters and all the artwork in the book are going to be hand inked by me. Jessica Fong is the collaborator, other artist. Her and some of the people from Lonely Egg Studio, we all work together to create this game. But we've been play testing it, and there's something like 12, it's like 12,000 some odd variables of what could happen in the game based on the hands that people win with, what cards they have at the end of certain rounds. So what happens is in the first round, it's your exploration round, and as you're exploring, you're basically unlocking the void, and like you're getting the components for the ritual, and then the ritual happens, and then based on what plays out from that ritual, one person becomes the conduit, and then based on what they had what components they had in hand, if they won the ritual, basically it's like a mini poker game, they become a monster. And then depending on what monster they are, that each monster, there's 10 different monsters. Each monster has different powers, like different perks and abilities that they can basically have that involve the cards, or that they can alter the game in very specific ways. And then the second half of the game is basically them building their components to banish the monster away and fight who used to be their cohort. Um, but the other part that happens is because the Void Rift was open, the monster gets an additional enchantment, and the survivors at this point, the surviving members of the team, get what dark gifts. And dark gifts again are like extra perks and bonuses that they get, abilities that they could either use together or individually as they're building their components to then defeat the monster in the big showdown at the end of the game. A game can take anywhere between like 20 to 30 minutes. To play. So it's a really good like pub game, really good pick up and play type game. But we're also exploring having legacy systems where depending on who won in the last game, or what regions were explored, you bring certain gameplay elements into your next round, and just basically like you could have a whole evening of playing the game and just like hanging out and exploring the artwork and whatnot.
You mentioned having trouble with the playtesting, and I actually have some friends that have their own Discord server where all they do is the playtesting through Tabletop Simulator.
That's what we're doing now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really helpful.
So
Yeah,
that
ideally, what we want to do is not have the same play testing people every time. And in person, it goes faster because the way you handle the cards and everything is just faster. Like Tabletop Simulator, as much as I love it, it is a little bit clunky. So part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we have different groups for testing, especially as we're making changes, because inevitably, what will happen is, play test A group, if they've already played the game and you make some changes and then they play it again, they're going to be comparing it to the previous iteration. So sometimes we want to go in with a fresh group, to see how, like, what their perception of the game is, and like that way their feedback is unfiltered from the previous iteration. And we sometimes end up bouncing back and forth or just putting, whole new groups together. Um, and also because there's so many different permutations involved. I want to say there's 16 enchantments, 16 gifts, 10 monsters, and then 3 different locations that you can explore that each have their own permutations on the game. Yeah, I think ultimately it's in the thousands for sure of how many different combinations you could have. So that's part of what we're doing as well, is we're making sure that there aren't any game-breaking permutations that could occur. So that way, when the game ships and everything, it's not going to mess up anything.
there's a callback here to something that we were talking about earlier in
Yeah,
getting multiple projects. Well, we were talking about working on multiple projects. So, but this is a nice tie in and a way to tie up the last little threads of that, because it's a project that you've finished, you've completed. So, keeping in mind what we talked about earlier, that there is no one size fits all answer to how people are going to time manage, and just as answering the question kind of for yourself, What did the
Mhm.
logistics look like when you guys were working on this project, and then you're balancing all of, the professional work, the, client work that you had?
Yeah.
You also have a partner that you're working with, and they have client work. So that's I'm really interested to hear about how you guys kind of organized and structured that to make sure you were making consistent progress and also managing to, meet together, figure it all out. I mean, this is like really time
Mhm.
consuming stuff. And then you put together a
It is.
successful Kickstarter. So yeah, what is like, walk me through a little bit of a overview
Sure.
of what the logistics were like for you guys there.
Initially, the logistics were we were treating it as essentially as a game jam between Lonely Egg and myself. There's actually 5 people involved in the making of the game,
Oh, wow.
with Jessica and I spearheading the art direction, me spearheading a lot of the writing and the lore, and then Andrew is handling the testing and the game design, like the mechanics. Um, and we also had Mark handling some of like more back end logistics, like producer logistics, like money and taxes and that sort of thing. And then David handling some of the testing, initial testing when we were in our early phases. But initially, it was supposed to be like a game jam. Our timeline was going to be like 2 to 3 months. We were going to take it to GDC, the Game Developers Conference, to bring a prototype, play it with people, get feedback live. Also, basically do like a whole roundtable panel presentation of it and all that stuff. And of course, GDC didn't happen. I was supposed to stay out there in San Francisco with them to basically get it all finished and or at least get a lot of the nuts and bolts ironed out and the artwork and everything ironed out so that when then we can just spend all of summer in the actual production doing like the layout and fleshing out and like I said doing all the variable testing. Um, but one of the things that we did is we first of all, because we were treating it like a game jam, our initial scope was smaller. It's it was made for RPG Zine Quest, which is an event that Kickstarter has started doing. And the very low commitment, like low bar, um, tabletop pen and paper type RPG games, like pamphlet type games. And I don't know if you guys know, but like where the whole idea of zines come from. But in like in the 60s and 70s, especially when photocopiers became more accessible to people, people started making zines. And sometimes they were fanzines, like for horror movies or music or whatever. Um, to people making like essentially homebrew games for or modules and expansions for like D&D and whatnot. And that's where the whole thing comes from. And it has this like whole aesthetic to it that really inspired what we're doing with the game. But as far as that's concerned, like that's kind of the bar that we set for the initial. But we really like the idea that we came up with. We like the design, we like the aesthetic, the monsters, all of that stuff. We love it a lot, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Um, and we weren't really expecting the Kickstarter to take off as hard as it did. So as a result of the Kickstarter, we've been able to flesh the game out even further. We have all these new systems that we want to bring back for like a expansion for that game that we're kind of shelving based on what we're doing with this one. But we're trying to. Part of what helps is having accountability partners with each other because we all have skin in the game in regards to time and in regards to our workload and everything else. Um, and then the other part of it is, just constant communication, especially in these days with everything that changed, because they had to move, believe it or not, over the summer between the pandemic starting and now, they've had to move 3 times
Hmm.
because of the fires and all that other stuff as well, all these logistics. Um, and I did my studio rebuild and all that stuff. So I've essentially moved as well over the summer because of this stuff. Because doing all this was like basically like moving house, even though I'm still in the same house. Like it was like moving house,
Oh,
setting
yeah.
it all up in one place and getting all my musical equipment and everything set up. Because I'm looking to significantly ramp up what I do over the next few weeks, months, in regards to what content I'm putting out. Um, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier is about like setting realistic milestones, bite-sized chunks that you can actually manage, constant communication. In this case, if you're working with other people, it helps to have those accountability buddies. If you're working by yourself, kind of to more adequately answer your question, I think the same things apply. having communication with yourself sometimes means taking notes and putting shit in your calendar, or even just leaving stickies around your computer. Like, hey, don't forget to do this. Hey, today you're sketching that. You know, tweet about this. Post this on Instagram. Whatever it is, having that kind of transparency with yourself. Um, I've since I used to be one of those people that would keep everything in my head. And I've since learned not to do that. Like how
Right.
much less work it is to just write shit down and forget about it, not having to like try to remember stuff.
Right.
So now I have a little notebook where I keep my ongoing stuff. On my I have a Discord server that I made just basically for me and some of my gaming stuff. But really my Discord server is all just for my notes. I have a couple of channels that are just mine where I keep like what I'm working on currently, my deadlines, any links or resources that I need to be looking at, or stuff that I'm backlogging for when like articles and interesting things like that I want to look at. Oh, I have a backlog of links that I can revisit. Sometimes I just leave it sitting in my tabs until I have dedicated times during the week that I catch up on that stuff. So I manage those distractions that way. Yeah, that is the studio. Yep, that's my bunch of heavy metal magazines and a lot of pulpy books over there, some board games, and then over here it's like a lot of art books. My drawing table's over there, my musical equipment's over there, and then over here I have I call it the puck, but it's a round red puck couch um, for reading because I have a lot of my reading books and just kind of like my chill out area is over there. So I kind of have like a nice little cozy, very Twin Peaks inspired space here.
I wanted to circle back to what you said about the Kickstarter. You said that it surpassed your expectations. Beyond the intrinsic draw of the content,
Yeah.
do you have any extrinsic ideas as far as what may have brought more people to it than you would have expected?
Um, I think the streaming certainly helped. The artwork for sure helped because one of the things we did is we cranked out quite a few pieces of art for it ahead of time. And also, the community. I think for any Kickstarter to succeed, and these days actually, for us artists, creatives of any kind, um, to make it, it's I think now more than ever having a community, not just an audience, a community that has your back is so important. I think without people, like Spectre Faye and Beth, yourselves, Rosen, all of these people, Eon, all of these people who, are constantly signal boosting us, but also, getting excited about what we do and all of that. Um, word of mouth, word of mouth helps a lot. One of the things that I kind of, and I'm sure, I'm not the only one who's noticed this, but um, when you're selling something yourself, it's very different. There is more resistance and reluctance and pushback. And I'm sure if any of you guys who do the convention circuit, you know what I mean. Like if you're selling your wares, there is a different dynamic than if somebody's in your like at your booth geeking out over your work, and then somebody else walks up and then they basically pitch your work to the person that just walked up. As a fan, I think fans hyping your work to other fans or potential fans is a lot easier than you trying to reach those fans yourself. So that's another reason I think community and having people who have your back that way is so important and so much appreciated. Because otherwise, I probably wouldn't be able to do this anymore. And I don't know how much that goes for a lot of other people, but for myself, I know that's certainly to be true. Um, One of the things that's happened recently as well is I've not really been active on social media as much anymore as I used to be because it's just gotten way too loud. And I
Mm.
just don't have the patience for it anymore like I used to.
Yeah.
Um, but through the networks and the communities that I have, like I'm still getting just as much work as I was when I was really active on social media. I think if I did both, that would be even better. But right now, I have the spoons that I have, and most of my spoons are sporks. So that's the
Yeah.
reality of the situation right now.
That's fair. We
So
had a few questions for you about
yeah,
social media that didn't feel like they tied in at any point, and
okay,
it's okay that we don't get to them. I would just say that it never gets old hearing or being reminded about the importance of community in a day an age when social media does have such a pervasive influence on all of our lives that
Yeah.
at the bottom of all of it, there really is the necessity for people of like mind and companionship and a family.
Yeah.
Let's call it what it is rather than this sort of like almost kind of played out word of community. It's like we're really talking about
Takes a
families,
village.
right? Yeah. I always love hearing that, being reminded of that, reiterating it. That like the interconnectivity of the internet hasn't broken that, and in fact has taught us how much more important that is than ever, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Speaking of this idea of community, another thing that you're part of that I wanted you to talk about a little bit was the Art Forge. Something
Oh
that you
yeah.
help run and manage, and you speak a little bit about. Can you tell us what that is?
So the Anvil Art Forge started, oh boy, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. No, initially it was kind of just like a quiet, small group while we refined the nuts and bolts of how we wanted it to work. Um, it's not a huge group on Facebook. Actually, the Zen workshop server is an extension of the Anvil Art Forge, but the whole idea of the Forge is a lot of what I've been talking about is in order to master your craft and master your work, you also have to work on mastering yourself. And that's really the crux of it. It's really about, one of our rules is like, be respectful to everyone, including yourself. Because it creates a certain dynamic in a room, in any room. If someone's being, very self-deprecating and like, fishing for compliments and shit like that, it creates a certain vibe, and we don't want that vibe. Also, the idea, there's people out there who obsess a lot over what other people are doing with their work, how other people are doing their work. Are people tracing? Are people photo bashing? Are people doing blah 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 blah? And a lot of our idea comes from, focus on your paper, focus on what is yours, focus on your artwork. Because if you're obsessing over what somebody else is doing with their artwork, you're not improving your artwork in any way. Criticizing what other people's doing, gossiping about other people, that's not helping your artwork in any way. That's crab mentality bullshit as far as I'm concerned. You're buying into that trend, you're buying into that mindset, and it's not, while you're sitting there talking about how someone else's work is shit because they photo bash, your artwork's not getting any better. So maybe just focus on your art, focus on what you're doing, channel that energy on that. But really, it's a place just for, yeah, like having a chill space for that kind of mindset, where everyone could have constructive criticism, learn how to be a constructive criticizer, as well as being someone who takes criticism, effectively, positively, with a growth-minded approach to everything. I guess Kaizen is one of the terms that's out there in corporate land about this. It's just basically constant improvement, and it
What
just
was
goes
it?
back
What
to
was
like
it
the one
called again?
percent. Kaizen.
Kaizen.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, Kaizen.
Is that
Yeah,
is
it's
that
just
is that
about
an Asian or
yeah,
from?
Japanese,
Oh,
the
okay.
Japanese business world. Yeah.
Oh, so like Kaizen.
Hmm.
Okay, interesting. What is
Yeah,
it
it's just
again?
about constant improvement. It's about constant improvement.
Oh, like
Kaizen.
that, like the 1% thing that you were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
very much that similar mentality.
With it being
People
on,
bash photo bashing. That's boomer as fuck, says Chewbacca Khan. Sorry.
no, it's all good.
In the chat.
Um, the chat, shout out to the chat, by the way. Always wonderful to have everybody in, and it was alluded to um, earlier, but we always appreciate you guys being here, and even though we're not able to respond to everything in the same way, it's incredibly valuable input. The stream or the Twitch recordings are saved as highlights, so you'll always be able to come back, and it's kept for posterity. Going back to the Anvil Art Forge, you said
Mhm.
it was on Facebook. Does it cause you any trouble there? Like like you were saying that you kind of stay a little bit further away from social media these days, and when you have a group that's very important to you and it's on Facebook, one of the like heavier hitters in terms of the
Right.
demands on your attention. How does that work? And is there a reason why you keep it on Facebook as opposed to trying to move it to Discord or have it be there?
Well, that's just it. mostly everybody who is active in the Facebook group has become active on the Discord, so that
Okay.
kind of resolved itself.
Okay.
Everybody's, I think, well, not everybody, but many people are in the same boat where people are getting sick of social media, and also the fact that the algorithms and everything else make it basically impossible to keep up with not only your personal connections but groups like this one as well.
Mhm.
When we started the what was it? Yeah, when we started the group, initially we're like 200 people, then we shot up to like 700. But what we noticed is that there wasn't a lot of activity, and we weren't interested in having like a big, huge group. We were interested in quality over quantity, quality of instruction, conversations we're having, the conversations that we have on my stream. So we wanted more of that sort of thing happening. Um,
Wait, hold on 1 second, Sal. Let me pause you because
yeah,
you were getting a lot of
is
glitches
my
in the
roboting out?
matrix. Now it seems to have passed. Yeah, sorry, I didn't want you to say
Okay,
anything like super awesome and have it be lost.
okay.
But yeah,
Hopefully
you're
that's
good now.
stable now.
Yeah,
I'm
you're
looking
good
at
now.
Discord. Looks like it's okay. All right, cool. Yeah, so quality over quantity. Having conversations like the ones we typically have, like on my streams, the ones we're having today. That's really what we're interested in. Not a lot of like this the indulgent crap, basically.
Wait,
So
this
one of the things
isn't
that we did is
indulgent?
this is indulging in a more productive manner, I'd like to think.
Oh, thank God.
It's not like we're sitting here talking about, talking crap about Blake or something.
Love you, Blake.
Um, love you, Blake. But yeah, initially we were doing interviews every week. No, sorry, every month. Um, but this year, with everything that's changed, we decided to just focus on our personal lives and just kind of rethinking the whole thing. I'm thinking in this next coming year, depending on what happens, hopefully we don't get hit by an asteroid or I don't know what the fuck's next.
Shh,
Um,
stop. Don't
we will hopefully
even do
be
it, dude. Don't.
locusts. I don't know. Hopefully we'll start doing the interviews again. But when we're doing the interviews, we're doing them kind of like this. We're talking more about the introspective side of things rather than like the how do you do stuff. Like, oh,
Mhm.
when did you start? What was your first break? It was
Right.
more, and we did a lot of thematic ones too. The last one we did was last Halloween. We did one with uh, fuck, the special effects artist from Nightmare on Elm Street and another special effects artist from Outpost 31 Productions,
Mhm.
talking about concept art and its relation to practical effects and production fabrication. And it was a good show. We went for a long time.
Nice.
Um, but that's the kind of thing that we would do. We would theme things. One of them was all about creating your own IP. So I was talking to creators who have embarked on creating their own properties and launching their own things, either as Kickstarters or um, self-published properties, or who have had their products picked up by companies where they have creative control, that sort of thing. Another
You
one
ho-
was all just about comic artists and the comic art industry, but again, talking about it from that perspective of like who are they as people and um, beyond the artwork, beyond the surface level of the art.
you host these on your Discord, you said?
It used to be on Twitch. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You can actually find all of these on my YouTube channel still.
Okay, good. That's what's
All
going to be
the
my
old
next
interviews
question.
are there.
Yeah, yeah, you've got all the recordings there. Okay, cool. Then
Yeah.
I'll have to make a note to also put a link to your YouTube. Um, well, as we're coming close to a close, Sal, I want to
Yeah.
make sure that we haven't missed anything that you were hoping to talk about. So if there's anything that we didn't get to that you want to point out or you wanted to highlight, um, do so now or forever.
Sure.
Quiet.
Well, we touched a little bit on the mentorship stuff. Really quick, for anybody who's curious, you can learn about that at my Patreon. I'll drop a link to that in the chat as
Mm-hmm.
well.
And there'll be a link in the
The
show notes
mentorship
too.
this program is called the Artist Doing Being Mentorship, and it's all about. In fact, I'll post a link that's specifically about that. The Artist Doing Being Mentorship, I call it Doing and Being because it's like the doing is all the fundamental stuff. It's anatomy, it's lighting, composition, all of those types of things, down to time management and process, that sort of thing. And being is more the internal stuff. It's the head game stuff. It's how the relationship you have with yourself as your own boss towards your art, how you talk to yourself, how that influences the quality of what you bring to the table when you sit down to work. Um, and furthermore, how that affects you as a professional, which is something that I don't hear talked about very often. So very quickly to like touch on that. Um, Blake, really quickly to touch on that. For example, if you don't value your own work and you don't have a very clear, as objective as possible view of your own work as you could have, imagine how that impacts the kind of rates that you give your clients. Imagine the way that impacts the language you use when talking to clients. So, for example, the old model of someone who doesn't value their own work and kind of like talks themselves out of stuff and talks themselves down and like does that whole fishing for compliments kind of behavior, um, is they give a client the rate and they're like, yeah, so what do you think?
Mm.
Oh, it's this much, and then they have that whole turmoil, like maybe I'm charging too much and all that stuff, and they kind of lowball themselves first of all, and they're second guessing themselves, and that comes through in the language that they use with the client. It's like, oh well, it's 350. What do you think?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff,
Yeah. They
and of
start
course,
negotiating with themselves immediately.
immediately, and the clients are going to take that. They're going to latch
Right.
on to it. It's like, yeah, well, we actually only have whatever. They're always going to try to do that. Um, Versus the artist who knows what their time is worth. Because here's the thing, as artists, you're not selling art, you're selling your time. That's what you're doing, is you're selling your time. You're not selling a picture, you're selling the amount of time that it's going to take you to make that picture.
Yeah.
um, you're selling the value of that, or the value of that person's vision or that company's vision. That's really what's on the market there. um, so that's very different from the artist who's like, yeah, what do you think? To someone who's like, well, it's going to take me about this long based on your deadline. It'll be, by this time, it'll be this much. I can send you the invoice. Let me know where to send it. It's very clear, very cut. Like none of the weird stuff involved. Um, and it doesn't. You can be a professional. You don't have to be an asshole about it, but it saves everyone so much time, including your clients, whose own time is valuable. So that's just like one example of like a practical uh, ripple of what can happen when someone's relationship with their own artwork changes. Basically, the way I look at it is it's all about getting you out of your head so that you can deal with what's in front of you, whether it's an empty canvas, a difficult client project, a difficult client, or personal stuff like personal family issues or like whatever. Like whatever's in front of you is to get you out of your own head so that you're out of your way, so you can deal with what's in front of you directly and more objectively, as objectively as possible. That's a big part of the tool set and what I bring to that. Um, so yeah, if you guys want to know more about it, feel free to email me, get in touch with me. I'd be very happy to talk shop with it. If you guys want to like have a call with me to learn more about it, reach out to me and we can set that up and I can tell you a little bit more about what it's about, how it all started, how my journey as a weird introspective 4-year-old kid having an existential moment at the age of 4 led to all of this.
Yeah.
My own journey as well, like how that happened, how what I learned from myself and both through trial and error, successes and failures, that have shaped this whole thing that I do. I would love to hear from you and help you do what you want to do, not what anybody else wants to do. Oh, that's another thing about the Forge. Actually, it's weird how the Forge has tangentially led to this mentorship that I'm doing now. One of the other things about the Anvil Art Forge, the way that we critique artwork is with the idea of serving what the person wants to do. Whereas I notice a lot of people who give critique based on how they would create the work that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
stylistically, thematically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I'm the same way when it comes to this mentorship program. Um, it's about me helping you do and walk the walk that you say you want to walk, not me telling you walk the way that I walk. That's not really helping anybody. Kind of going back to the conversation we had earlier about advice, right? Like there's always going to be variables. Everyone's going to respond to something different. My job in that position is to look for all the threads that the person has missed help them chase those threads to figure out where the programming is coming from and how can they write their own new programming, because a lot of what I do in this program is based on the idea that we're all storytellers and we've all told ourselves stories about who we are, but we forgot that we have that skill. And meanwhile, we're walking around in the world being a Joby, being a Sal, being a Moose, and you know, not having a say in that. This is about having a say in that, about having choice and agency over who you are, over who you be, what you present in yourself, and then of course by proxy externally around you in the world, in your work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whether you're professional or not. And one of the things that's really been fascinating as well is I've worked from people who are, just going to college, like they have their whole life ahead of them. They have to make these big decisions and all that stuff about what they need to do with their art and all that. To people who've been in the industry for like 25 years. That one was a shocker. When I was doing the beta test for the program, somebody asked like, "Hey Sal, what you up to?" And like, what's this thing about this mentorship thing that you're doing? I was supposed to just be beta testing with just like 4 people. It ballooned to 12 because word of
Hmm.
mouth got out. And also sometimes I'd be catching up with people and talking kind of like I am with you, and they'd be like, "Oh, tell me more, tell me more, tell me more." And I'd be like, "Okay, this is this." And they go, "Yeah, so how do I sign up?" And I'd be like, "What? Really, you?" Because we assume that, like, when someone is successful, we assume what success looks like,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
and that was a big lesson as well. I was like, "Holy shit!" Like, I thought John Doe had all his stuff together and like he was successful and like all this stuff, and he had it all figured out because this is someone I was looking up to. And here they're asking me to do this program with me because they're feeling really stuck with imposter syndrome and all the anxiety shit, and it's like crippling, and it's all that shit. And I was like, wow, man, like this is crazy, like how much it took off unexpectedly. So that's another reason I think I'm so passionate about it, because it speaks true to my own self as well about what I value, because I really value agency and choice and awareness, mindfulness. um, when someone asks you who you are, like I think it's really important that we actually know who we are instead of just who we've been programmed to answer that we are. Um, Going
Yeah.
back to like the whole programming, and one of the things I often talk about too is like the shitty mixtapes. Right? We have a bunch of shitty mixtapes in our heads that aren't ours. Some of them we made up, and some of them were given to us. And when those shitty mixtapes start playing and you start dancing to them, that's it. You're no longer dealing with reality. You're just listening to that shitty mixtape doing what it's doing. And the whole idea is like, well, you can make new mixtapes. How about we make new mixtapes that will help you do what you want to do with your life, regardless of what it is, just so that you can be more aware and more in tune with what's going on, and be in the zone, even whatever
Right.
that looks like for each person.
Yeah. Terrence McKenna had a great quote. If you don't have your own program, you're going to be part of somebody else's program. So which do you
Yep.
want? I just
Yeah.
have one. I just have one more question for you, Sal.
Sure.
Um, it, aside from things that you're working on in your own projects, what's something that's happening in the world that you're just really excited about? You're just stoked that it's
Excited
happening.
about.
Yeah.
Hmm. I
Take
have
your
to think
time.
about that one. Yeah.
If you can't think of anything, just say tacos, and we're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm
Food is
always
always
excited
a
about
good way to go.
tacos. Yeah, food. Oh God, Beth and then Eon and all the regular crews over on my stream know how much we get into food all the time, all the time. But food is wonderful because it's a way that cultures have always bonded.
Yeah.
People always bond through food. Food is so important.
Hmm.
Culturally as well, like exchanging our foods, our spices, our recipes, uh, diffusion. That's such an important thing. But honestly, let's see. I'm gonna say virtual reality.
Oh yeah.
I'm excited about virtual reality. I'm excited about, especially the way that everything is changing so suddenly this year with all of this stuff going on. I want to say virtual reality is super super exciting. That it's made such a comeback, I guess, because
Hmm.
Virtual reality is weird. I remember like in the late 90s and early 2000s, virtual reality was talked about a lot. And you'd go to the arcades, and some arcades would have like a setup for it. And it was really
Hmm.
rudimentary and really like not realistic compared to what we have now.
Yeah. And then it
But
kind
then
of
it kind of
pooped
like
out.
fell to the
Yeah.
wayside. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, now we have, Oculus and HTC and Sam, like all these companies jumping on that stuff. And I think it's exciting. It's exciting for not just for like art and games and that sort of thing, but also for human connection,
Uh-huh.
um, for doing activities socially, for sightseeing, for I mean, hell, even like other applications like going to concerts across the world and things like that. I think there's a lot of untapped potential when it comes to VR and 3D peripherals and the usage of um, yeah, VR sculpting, VR art. Yeah, all of that stuff is really exciting.
But
Is sharing those experiences.
definitely not porn, because that's
Oh,
disgusting
absolutely,
and you should
porn.
be ashamed of yourself. Go talk to your
Or
priest.
don't.
What?
What if your priest insists? Depends on what kind of priest, Joby.
Oh, is the priest there too? I'm sorry, we're
What
getting
if
off
they're like
track.
a tantric? Like, there's a whole that's a whole rabbit hole we can jump into on another show.
Thank God the recording isn't showing Moose's face right now. He gets so mad at me when I do this.
Okay, so real quick, I'm going to change the
Yeah,
topic.
cool.
Sal mentioned a few times the GDC talks, and you can find a lot of these on their YouTube channel. They post one a day, and they're often really dry presentations, but sometimes they're like really entertaining. But most of the times you'll get some information out of them. I would
Mm.
recommend that you just flip through them, watch 10 minutes of it. If it doesn't seem like it's a talk that's going to be interesting to you, then just go to the next one. Um, even if you're not interested in video games, because they can go into production and art and
Who
all these
who
things.
is this?
This is GDC.
Oh, GDC. Okay, yeah,
Yeah, they have their own GDC YouTube channel. Like,
yeah, the vault.
but the Vault is their own thing, and then they have a YouTube channel too. So the
Mm.
Vault is for past participants who want to watch all the videos and get all the slides along with them. Whereas the YouTube channel is just they have a camera in the
Everything.
back, and then they let that play through. If you're looking for something a little more entertaining from the video game side, there's Game Maker's Toolkit, which has a lot fewer videos, but they're like much more well edited and entertaining. They're great.
Oh,
That'll teach you.
oh,
How
there he
how
goes.
how dare you start talking about anything but
Yeah, so I don't know what the last thing I said was, but the other thing after Game Maker's Toolkit is extra credits. They have a lot of history videos and sci-fi videos in there as well, but it started out as a video game entertainment, video game developer. How do you make video games type thing? So
Mm.
yeah, those are the places I would go to learn how to make games, whether it's board games or uh, even D&D supplements and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and not only that, but there's a lot of really great talks like postmortems that are you can learn a lot from, where people get into more of the personal stories behind the games that they made. What's the game? Owlboy? Is that it? Owlboy? Their talk was amazing. Highly recommend checking out their talk. It took them 10 years to make their pixel art game, and they talk a lot about like the failures and the small successes along the way, what they would do differently, but also how it affected them personally, how the success of the game affected them personally, and all of that stuff. And that can be really fascinating. Can be really good learning opportunities for people who are interested in any of that stuff. But not just as game developers, but like entrepreneurs or professionals of any kind. Really, there's
mhm.
a lot of good stuff. I'm a big fan of learning from other people's failures and successes as well.
One I want to point out to anybody that plans on like working with a team is there's a video on GDC about it's an EA team and they were more productive than any other team at the studio. And it was oh, I'm trying to remember the exact words now, but it was a distribution of crap. I'm gonna have to think about it and put it in the notes. But it was autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's it. It
Mm,
was talking about how you get to motivate people to work for you, and it's the short version is you get them to be involved and have ownership of the decisions that they make, and you think that you hire people that are good at what they do, and you let them do it.
mm.
We're coming up on 2 hours, so I have to jump in here. I want to make a quick note about next week. We're going to be talking to Heather Hitchman. We alluded a
Oh,
little
sweet.
bit to Patreons in this episode. And next week, we're going to be talking to Heather, I think, pretty much entirely about her Patreon because it's a case study in success. And she has a lot of great things to say about it. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, please make sure you show up for that. And to put a final note on it, Sal, the DarkCloak, thank you so much, man. I really
Hey,
appreciate
thank
it.
you so much for having me.
As usual, it's a dam break of fascinating information from you every time. And I can't wait to the next time that you're going to be on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Tomorrow actually, I'll be on tomorrow. We are doing a blind D&D sketch jam
Oh,
where
all
I
right.
have a guy called Shiny who's my DM for our games. He comes on and he just gives us descriptions, no names, doesn't tell us what we're actually drawing. He gives us blind descriptions of random monsters from the D&D compendium, and we sketch them based on his descriptions and see how close we get to what it actually is. It's pretty hilarious. It's a good time. We're usually timed for like 20 minutes for each sketch, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Right on, dude. I'm going to hit the end on the record button, man, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot, dude.